Alright everyone, welcome back again to more Misericorde. Well, they're, a bit creepy. I think. I wouldn't know. The devil plays with the sinner like the cat does with a mouse after all. Come to think of it, are there any cats in the Bible? Only one actually. Mentioned offhand in the letter of Jeremiah as part of the Baruch. Huh. Goodness, you really are a scholar. Hold on. What about lions? What about them? Never mind. Oh. I flushed red. It was deeply embarrassing to be bested this way, and especially by Flora. I wasn't even sure she had actually read the Bible. Well, it just goes to show, all of us have places we could brush up on our understanding of scripture. Indeed. Ha ha ha. I smiled weakly at the pair of them and took my leave. I was feeling quite strained after this morning's stressful events, and I wasn't sure how much more social interaction I could handle before eating. I was angrier than I should have been about Flora's observation about lions. Angry at her or myself, I wasn't quite sure. Either way, I certainly did not feel up to the task of playing Inquisitor with Catherine. I decided to go for a stroll around the path between the rectory and the garden. I had been surprised by Darcy's shocking outbursts, relatively at least, as soon as the Superior had been out of earshot, but I was now finding myself agreeing with her. In total, the events of the past 2 days, day and a half really, had been unlike anything I could have possibly imagined while whittling away the hours in my cell. Do you find it mad too? I had seen a ghost or a devil in front of my very eyes the night before. Yet, here I was, wandering around the Abbey grounds, overwhelmed by the prospect of talking to any more human beings for a little while. The others had not believed me when I told them about the monstrous apparition, and it was that doubt I think that might have kept me from unraveling completely. At that moment, the most terrifying prospect in front of me was sharing a meal in a room with someone who potentially had stolen a man's tunic to cover up a vicious murder. But then surely all of that paled in comparison to what I had seen the night prior. An impossible creature threatening me with its blade before disappearing without a trace? If I held either of these scenarios in my head for too long, the grim tangibility of Sister Catherine's murder or the possibility that I had seen some kind of devil with my own eyes, I felt faint. No, I felt worse than faint. I felt like St. Vincent on the rack, having to choose exactly which end of myself I preferred to have burned, one thought at a time. Are you writing any of this down, by the way? Not that I mind if you did. She might not approve, though. I hear she holds quite fast to her rules despite all appearances. Haha. Anyway. While wandering, I found myself at the door to the chapel. I felt compelled to enter. What better place to collect myself? If anything could ease my mind at this point, it would be a moment's prayer. With some difficulty, I swung open the heavy door. I strode through the aisle, taking a moment to gaze up at the high ceiling. To feel at peace for just a moment. We have got to stop meeting like this. Ha! Sorry. It can be a little shadowy in here. That's quite alright. I'm just learning that I'm easily startled since leaving my cell. Nobody could blame me for that. How are you adjusting today? Did you start writing? I did, as a matter of fact. Lovely. Eustace wasn't too hard on you? No. Liar. That's good. I'm sure you'll end up locking horns eventually, so be ready. Really? Eustace seems so quiet generally. She is, but it's very easy to rile her up. Especially if you disagree with her about something. She and Catherine used to bicker a lot, I take it. Oh, endlessly. Especially about chronicling. Margaret extended a hand to the pew nearest us. Care to sit? Of course. We sat down together. Margaret gazed at the pulpit briefly before continuing. Eustace is very intelligent, and Catherine was too. And intelligent people sometimes enjoy having to go at each other for sport. It's how they show affection. What on earth would Catherine write that would irritate Eustace so much? I didn't read much of her chronicling, to tell you the truth. I don't think anyone here does. The job is really about writing something down for people to argue about years later. I suppose if we're living here, reading about it wouldn't be very interesting. Catherine had the same thought. She wrote about all kinds of things. I am meant to do that as well, I think. The letters? Yes, those were her sticking point. I think you're meant to just copy them word for word to mark time, but Catherine would go quite deep on some of them. There was one instance a couple of years ago. Yes? Actually, no. I thought of a better one. Have you ever heard of Reims Cathedral? No, actually. It's a very big cathedral in France. One of the biggest, in fact. It's quite grand. Anyway, it was damaged in the Great Fire, and Catherine was meant to write that down. Instead, she demanded to write a letter to the municipality over the smallest detail. There was a note in the letter about how the King of France had granted the city an octroi, and that funds for the repairs were coming from a tax on salt. What? That was more or less what everyone else said. Catherine was furious, though. What on earth for? Well, certainly, I think none of us would have noticed, but she had a point. France taxes salt very heavily, and Catherine thought it was highly unfair that the building was going to be repaired with money she said was being stolen from the poor. I must admit, this is completely beyond my understanding. Everyone needs salt, and everyone in France is taxed on it equally. It's how you make food survive the winter, for one thing, but it's an incredibly useful and valuable thing. I dread to think how much we spend on salt here, to tell you the truth, but mercifully, we don't have to pay quite the same way the French do. It just seems like a petty thing to pick at. The building needed repairing. Yes, but Catherine was beside herself for days. I remember her stalking around the halls, muttering to herself in very poor French, which was meant to be "damn your spires" or some such. Eustace forbade her to write it in a letter to the diocese on the subject. She was going to tell the diocese? Damn your spires. There you go. Holy cow. Margaret threw her head back and laughed, clearly enjoying a fond memory. The diocese? No, she was demanding to send a letter to the king. My goodness. Catherine sulked for days after Eustace told her off for that one. All over a building? It isn't about the building, it's about the very soul of the church, is what Catherine would tell you. She really found it distasteful that the repairs would be built at the expense of the people's basic needs, and wanted to make that known to anyone she could with a say in the matter. It wasn't the only time she got herself worked up over a building either. She heard about the last remaining ruins of the lighthouse of Alexandria being paved over to build a way for it, and she spent the whole week badgering Adela, asking if she knew enough Arabic to help her write a letter of complaint to the Sultan. I can understand her position, just it seems so fruitless. It sounds rather cruel to put it that way, but... Margaret grinned and shifted in her seat to face me. That's the essence of most of the arguments Catherine got into around here. You're not wrong, but... and so on. It sounds quite exhausting. I suddenly felt my stomach drop. Not to speak any ill of her, I mean. Margaret laughed again. You're fine. People said far worse of her while she lived. Angela once accused her of writing her own 12 conclusions. I find it rather touching that she can still put people in awkward positions like this. Her influence reaches beyond the grave. Beyond the grave? Do you believe in ghosts? Spirits? That's quite a question. I apologize if it's a touch strange to ask, just... You're not the first person who has mentioned feeling Catherine's presence lingering to me, or wished aloud for it. It's not a problem. But I should warn you that if this is an extension of your practical joke, the others are going to find bringing Catherine into the proceedings very distasteful. Would you believe me if I insisted that there was no prank? I would be curious to know what the other explanations you could give. If you really saw what you claimed to see, why are you still here? Why didn't you start running and stop only when you reached the next village over? I'm still mulling over the idea of running, to tell you the truth. But I don't think I could. That's interesting. Believe it or not, that makes me slightly more inclined to accept your story. Really? Very slightly. I have no explanation for what I saw, only that I saw it. A real monster menacing me with a wicked blade. Sounds absolutely chilling. The thing is, if I ran, where would I go? 2 days ago I hadn't been outside of my little room. I feel like if I left, you'd be experiencing the same confusion 10 times over. Yes, that's a good way to put it. The devil, you know, I understand the feeling. But you don't believe I actually saw anything? You don't accept the existence of ghosts at all? Evil spirits and the like? I was practically begging for reassurance at this point. I wouldn't say that. I saw something once, in the cellar late at night. A little devil with bulbous eyes and malformed teeth. In the cellars? But don't you sneak down there to raid the pantry some nights? Well, as I said, the devil you know. And sometimes I get quite hungry. You're pulling my leg, aren't you? Now why would I do something like that? We sat in silence for a moment. Finally, Margaret stood up and stretched her arms above her head. I think that's enough of deceit for now. Luncheon will still be a bit, correct? Let's go for a walk, you and me. Certainly. She walked briskly out of the chapel. I was too slow to help her with the large wooden doors, but she managed quite well enough on her own. She ushered me past, and then took a step ahead as the door closed. Margaret wanted to lead me somewhere, and I could not guess where. To tell you the truth, I've always had mixed opinions about the existence of ghosts. I've seen so many things that end up being tricks of the light. Figures in fog, that sort of thing. For years, the knocking and scraping in the walls here kept me up at night. But these buildings are very old and not particularly well built. That's the sort of thing I like to try and comfort myself with as well. But it's a bit different when you're all alone at night, isn't it? Yes. So you do believe me? Perhaps I do, perhaps I don't. But either way, there's something I'd like to show you. We were walking up the stairs to the second floor. Hold on. We're gonna need a candle for this. She jogged into the dormitories and after a moment emerged with a lit candle and a pricket. Come with me. She took me down the hall towards the intersection where I had seen the sword-wielding specter. There's no blood or anything here. We already looked. We're going a bit further than that. My heart jumped into my throat. Are we going down the hall to my cell? Just about. We walked together quietly for just a little while. This hall always made me feel uncomfortable. For a moment, I felt affronted that Margaret would even dare talk about what this hall might make her feel in my presence. But I suppressed the urge to chastise her. Nonetheless, walking down this hallway felt more precarious than my first encounter with the stairs. I take it you didn't come to the hagioscope very often then. Not for your advice, I'm afraid. Ah. We arrived at my cell. Margaret handed me the candle and began rapping her knuckles against the stone wall. Eventually, she found whatever she was looking for. She inserted her fingers between two of the old stones and pulled. To my shock, the wall swung open to reveal a passageway wide enough just about for one person. What? There's passageways all over this place. That isn't what I wanted to show you though. Follow me. She took the candle back and entered the narrow tunnel. I followed her nervously. Most abbeys have passages like this because there needs to be some space between the walls, see? It's an architectural thing. I think it helps the air as well. That's what my father used to say anyway. So this passageway isn't in and of itself particularly interesting. However, we kept walking until we finally came to a corner. Here we are. She took a few steps around the bend and beckoned me to join her. Like I was saying before, I've always been non-committal about things like luck and ghosts and curses and so on, but this always bothered me. And there have been too many things happening lately for me to discount it entirely. Parts of the abbey falling down, Catherine's death, and now your ghost. By this, you mean... Come closer. She held the candle out in front of her to better illuminate what she was referring to. I try not to take this passage anymore, because this makes me nervous. I gasped when I realized what she was looking at. One of the bricks lining the passageway had a detestable shape etched into it. I did not know what it was, but it filled me with enough dread just to look at that I knew it was wrong. Evil. My stomach churned as I remembered the superior's words to me about the providence of the abbey. Was the construction of this place really so mysterious? How could something like this have been allowed to make it into the very walls of the building? The work of some possessed builder, no doubt. A house of God built with no oversight and ill intent. I speak of it eloquently now, of course. However, in the moment, all I could do, all that I could muster, was something far less considered. Oh my God. Margaret grinned wickedly. Steady on. What was it you told me about cursing? Interesting. I didn't speak a word the whole walk back to the chapel. I was deeply disturbed. I didn't know what that horrible symbol meant, and I didn't want to. One look at it was enough to tell me that something dark was at work within the walls. something I did not want to meddle with under any circumstances. We arrived at the chapel doors and Margaret turned to me. Cheer up. It's a bit grim, but I've lived with it for ages. I try not to muck about with the unknown, and it doesn't muck about with me. Much, anyway. All that being said, I think I might take credit for the prank if I were you. Even if it wasn't you. Why would I do a thing like that? I don't know. It just seems like something you'd want people to think you were capable of. You gotta keep people guessing, yeah? You gotta make a name for yourself. I think I'll stick to being the chronicler. Ah, right, yes. I forgot to mention it, but I'm sure you'll do great work at all that. You ask good questions. It might have no Eustace, but I think that's critical for the job. I'm afraid most of my words since leaving the cell have been questions. And I'm afraid I don't have quite the same verve that Catherine seems to have had. There's no need to worry about it. Don't write like Catherine. Write like Hedwig. I bowed my head, attempting to hide my flushed cheeks. My starved pride had allowed the sliver of a compliment to rush to my head. Alright, Margaret, you're on my good side. I trust you. You seem cool. My starved pride had... Okay, I read that. I didn't feel too chuffed for long enough because... Ah! The chapel bell had just begun to ring just above us, scaring me out of my wits. I must have jumped several feet into the air out of shock. Margaret was grinning ear to ear when I came back down to earth. I clutched my chest instinctively, doubled over, and tried to regain my composure. Sorry, the spirit told me to run and ring the bell for luncheon. I didn't see you two there. I could hear her voice calling out to us from above like some apologetic angel. Margaret called up in response, apparently unfazed. That's alright. How on earth did we miss you? I came into the back door. The superior never locks it. Yeah. I really am so sorry, Hedwig. I didn't mean to give you such a scare. That's quite alright, Moira. Margaret here, like, smirking. Luncheon passed without much incident. Not that I was no longer expected to sit through extended introductions of myself and others. I could enjoy my food in relative peace. Darcy's cooking was excellent and much appreciated. Although I was beginning to realize that the emotional reservoir that eating refilled was shrinking with each passing meal. Part of this, perhaps, was the worried anticipation that someone might casually mention seeing the superior and I walking back from the hospital earlier. The amount of secrets I was responsible for already felt unsustainable, but the idea of those secrets coming to light was even worse. I participated in the conversation around the table superficially, just enough to avoid being asked if something was wrong. I was unsure if I'd be able to lie and say no. The Bible, of course, has plenty to say about lying. Bearing false witness breaks a commandment. Although in my time locked in a cell, I had read many musings from scholars smarter than I about whether or not that meant all untruths or if the commandment was speaking strictly about matters of court. I've told you my views on loose interpretation, but the Bible is inerrant. There is no getting around the fact that the midwives lying to the Pharaoh's men saved many lives, for example. Still, it was difficult to feel like I was acting as selflessly as they did. I felt closer to Augustine than Cassian. So far, another afternoon went by just fine, but let's find out what happens later tonight, you know? After luncheon, we all filed out of the rectory to return to our duties. Eustace made a beeline to the stairs up the library, and even though we had made it up after this morning's spat, I felt inclined to keep away from her a bit longer. Catherine slipped out of the rectory before I could ask her about James's story. I must admit I was relieved to once again have an excuse to avoid that conversation. I was more interested in the symbol Margaret had shown me, which I feared indicated something far more sinister than I or the superior were prepared for. Margaret seemed wholly unperturbed throughout her meal. How? I could not understand it. Just thinking about that twisted shape made me sweat. It had been so close to my cell. How had I never felt it? Had it woven some dark spell on me and I just hadn't noticed? You know what? Probably, which is why you're always throwing up dark bile and all that nonsense. Was it responsible for who I was? The mistakes I continued to make? The concessions I made without verbal complaint to fit in with these women? The lack of a fight I had put up to Superior as she broke the seal on my cell? Was that thing responsible? These thoughts ran rings in my head until I too felt as if I had been sprinting in circles for too long. I did my best to shut them out, and decided instead to wander down to the cellars, somewhat hopeful that it would keep me out of sight for that afternoon. After all, the cool air of the cellars would perhaps help clear my head. Ah, Hedwig, would you be so kind as to settle an argument between myself and Marta? I had chosen poorly. Argument? Try this. Ah! Is it supposed to smell like that? Not you too. It does smell absolutely rank, Adela. Adela was holding a stinking ladle over an open cask, waving it between our faces with a great deal of indignation. As I told you yesterday, Sister Marta, it smells like this temporarily. It gives the wine its flavor, and you can already taste it in this barrel. Go on. Must I? Better you than I. I'm afraid I might keel over if I inhale much more of this miasma. With trepidation, I took the ladle from Adela's hand and held it up to my lips. A half-finished wine smelled truly foul, enough to make me cough. Oh boy. However, Adela was glaring at me with such determination that I was ever so slightly more afraid of her than the liquid. Closing my eyes, I braved a taste. It was actually not that bad. It was nowhere near as disgusting as the smell. However, it was clearly not meant for drinking yet. Whatever sweetness I could detect on my tongue was soon covered up by a watery and weak fruit flavor, which was all soon replaced by the overpowering stench of the ladle and barrel. It's coming together. Unbelievable. See? Even half fermented, the power sherry holds is undeniable. How long will it take to come into its own? It takes several years to properly ferment. This batch is quite young. It's only started when I first arrived. I've been dragging Sister Marta into the future. Thank God this isn't the only one I have to work with. You have help. Surely you're not rotating all the casks throughout the Solera yourself. Of course not. What's the Solera? All of these barrels, they have to move. You bottle some of the oldest wine from the bottom cask and then refill with some of the youngest, then rotate that back to the top. It keeps the quality consistent, and it means that some of the oldest batch is in every bottle. She took a moment to spoon the ladle into the liquid and tried to sip herself. She smacked her lips and looked thoughtful. That sounds arduous. Too right. Helps to have some unruly younger sisters around to threaten with manual labor. I am always happy to help with winemaking. Believe me, I know you are. So, does Darcy grow grapes too? Oh no, I use some fruits from the garden to flavor the other wines, but the grapes are from the village. The slope of the Tor is good for vineyards, but it gets too cold up here around the abbey proper. They only recently finished the last harvest and brought it to us, hence the Solera. There certainly is an awful lot of work to do around here. It sounds like... Thank you for saying so. Some people don't appreciate just how complicated our work can be. Speaking of, I should really tend to my next task. Sister Hedwig, would you walk with me? I bowed my head to Marta, who responded in kind even though she was preoccupied with sealing up the test cask. Adela walked me back through the rows of wine barrels and up the stairs, striding with purpose. I struggled to keep up as she crested the staircase into the hall around the cloister. Sister Hedwig, how are you finding Limbarrow, Tor Abbey? Well, I'm not used to it yet, obviously. Yes, it's obvious. I hope you didn't mind me saying. Not at all. I'm also new here, and I can tell that you're suffering in the same ways I suffered. Oh, was I? Was I suffering in the same way as Adela? I nearly blurted out, but managed to restrain myself. You are anxious. You are confused. You are eager to please everyone you meet. I was the same way for a while, but you must not be afraid to stand your ground when you feel you must. I don't know what you mean. You're doing it right now, Sister Hedwig. You know exactly what I mean because I am describing you as you are acting for me as we speak. What is this about, Adela? Have I offended you? Only in my sense of justice. I want what is best for you, Sister Hedwig. I want to see you thrive. Do not retreat into your shell like Sister Flora does. She has an excuse. She's not yet 20. But you are nearing 30, are you not? Tell me, Sister Hedwig, was the sherry really so bad? It was quite disgusting. Pah! Of course it was. Sister Marta is going to ruin all of it before it's due. But surely you couldn't be anything but foul midway through the aging process. I'm no expert, but I thought wine took time. It would taste strange no matter what, but the taste I had after you, it was all wrong. I worked on many wines and have learned how to taste how wine is going to taste. And that's sherry. It is not coming together as you described. It was more of a guess. It was a lie. A polite one, but untrue all the same. I'm sorry, but shouldn't you be telling Marta, not me? Oh, I will be marching back to Marta in just a moment. Believe me, Sister Hedwig. But I want to help you as well. Never be afraid to speak your mind. The others will respect that much more than endless acquiescence. I find that hard to believe. See? You're already catching on. No, I'm not practicing, I just don't understand. I don't want to fight everyone. Who said anything about fighting? I'm not saying you should be contrary. I'm saying you should not pretend to be someone you are not. Be Hedwig. You're not the first person to tell me this today, believe it or not. All the more reason to take me seriously, please. I have been in your position before. I have felt lost and overlooked. But I became much happier when I stopped trying to please everyone. I had no way to explain to Adela that beyond being thrust into an entirely new world of social interaction, I was also trying my best to ingratiate myself to everyone for a reason. Butting heads with Sister Angela was more than enough conflict for me. And given that I was here to unmask a murderer, I felt that drawing too much attention to myself was unwise. Being the newcomer had surely made me visible enough without tempting fate, but there was more to it than that. Quite simply, I had no idea who Hedwig was. Anyway, I have other business to attend to, and then I'll be giving Sister Marta a piece of my mind. And then by supper, we will be friends again. This is how things work. You must be strong. I will try. See that you do. I am on your side, Sister Hedwig. Adela gave me a surprisingly firm pat on the shoulder and left. I like you too, Adela. You're great. You're telling Hedwig to be true to herself, and I can appreciate that very much. Whereas everyone else, they're just fooling around with her, which is fine because she's the new girl in town, or the new nun. I stood in the corner. We had been conversing for a short while. I found Adela's penchant for romantic language somewhat charming up until now, but I did not appreciate these trickly platitudes. I was bouncing between embarrassment and fury. I needed a moment to myself. It was not yet even close to the supper time. The days here, it seemed, would be excruciatingly long, until I settled into a routine. As I calmed down, I thought about where I should go next. I'd already bothered Eustace enough for one day. I didn't want Darcy to get sick of me, and I had just left the cellars. Moreover, I hadn't a clue where anyone would be at this time of day. Margaret, Catherine, Moira, anyone really. I yearned for the comfort of my cell. At least there, my task had been clear as crystal. Around this time, I'd casually be setting into a copy down some Bible pages after reflecting on some scripture. It was almost automatic. Perhaps I'd while away the evening illuminating a page in gold leaf. When I started, I remember the last page I transcribed before leaving the cell. The book I'd thrown out of the window. Surely it'd be weathered by the elements by now, but I felt a strong urge to go and reclaim the half-finished tome. If nothing else, it would be a comforting reminder of the last time I had a clear sense of purpose. It wasn't a terribly long walk to the side of the building my old cell window had faced. There were no paths on that side of the building, however. The terrain was uneven, and the grass quite tall. It was strange seeing the buildings from this side. In the courtyards and cloister, everything looked flat and mathematical, but here the earth rose and fell like waves around the stone. There was an immense forest not far from the abbey on this end, and my heart leapt into my throat as I remembered the mysterious figure I had seen standing not far from where I was searching now. I recognized my window high up on the wall. There actually weren't many openings on this side of the building. Most of the glass windows faced inward, towards the cloister. The book was not here. A chill ran out my back. I had seen it in the morning after my tantrum, clear as day. Was I truly going mad? Had I hallucinated a book before the ghost and goat? I scanned the tall grass around me. Maybe I had slid down the hill or bounced in a fashion I had not noticed. Perhaps I was simply looking in the wrong spot. Try as I might, I could not find it. Unless it had been swallowed by the earth, the book had been moved. Who in their right mind would want a half-finished Bible soaked by rain and tainted with my own bile, no less? Then my foot slipped. I rode down the hill with a yelp. I tumbled several times, legs overhead, end over end. Hey, don't laugh. It was quite terrifying. What if I had broken a bone or fallen into some inescapable hole? I came to rest against a small tree. I scrambled to my feet using the trunk for leverage. I spat a little grass out of my mouth and groaned as I realized my habit was covered in dirt and grass stains. What a mess. It was then I saw something highly curious. A piece of fabric was dangling from a branch on the tree I was leaning against. It was a small strip of black cloth. I carefully detached it from the sharp bit of branch it was snagged on. That would mean The figure I had seen that night outside my window was real.